All right, so we're going to talk today about successful Revit training for all. Now, understand that this is primarily geared toward the higher senior level people, CAD managers, BIM managers, but the concepts are the same no matter if you're an entry-level user, a mid-level user, someone who just wants to increase their own skill set to perhaps make themselves more promotable, more valuable to their company. But understand that part of having a successful training is to start with the right bones. So in order for us to do that, we're going to talk about how to build an effective program, how to create effective training materials, conveyance of standards and their importance to your company and your organization, using mentors. How many of you have had a mentor in a previous job? Did that help you? Significantly. Creating a feedback loop into the program to help drive future training. The feedback loop is important, and we'll get to that. And then building timelines for follow-up. After you get training and you go back to doing your job, if there's no follow-up and there's nothing for you to work on, what happens? You lose the skill. So building an effective program. The first thing we're going to start with is interview. It's interview time, okay? Talk to, and again, this also applies to yourself. Talk to yourself and say, what do I not know? What do I know well? How can I be better? It's the same. Talk to the new hires in an organization. What don't you know about our standards? What don't you know about Revit? What don't you know about our programs? Make pointed inquiries to draw out the key points, and these key points become the focus of what you're going to train about. And if you had someone who did not make a probationary period, talk to their manager. Find out what they didn't have that was necessary. Was it a personality conflict? Was it simple CAD skills? Revit skills in your cases? All of these things are important factors to understand when you're building a training program, is that if you don't understand the people you're hiring and you don't understand the industry that they're coming from or where they're going to, you're never going to create an effective program. So now we get to the platform-specific questions. Have they ever used Revit before? Were they using AutoCAD previously and are having to learn Revit at your organization? How many of you are long-term AutoCAD users that your office changed over to Revit and you had to fight to get your way back up to a comfortable skill level in Revit? A number of you. Was it fun? No, not at all, right? Have they received any formal training in Revit? These are, again, pointed questions. What was the last version you received formal training in? Okay, those are critical factors. If the last version of Revit that I had formal training on is 2007, is that applicable to what's going on today in 2017? Maybe? Okay, and as part of that, was it a specific training? Like, did they go to a 4-day training class at a partner center or a reseller? Did they learn it on a 2-day power course at the local community college? Did they take 1 semester of Revit in college in order to get their architectural degree? Those are critical factors in understanding where the skill set lies of the people you're training. Were they using a prior version of Revit? When was the last time they used Revit professionally? How many of you have had instances where you were on hiatus for a year and got back into Revit after a year? Okay, how painful is the first couple of weeks of going, I know this program does this, but I don't remember how. We've all been there. Okay, have you used a comparable solid modeler before? How many of you have ever had any exposure to Bentley Architecture or, what's the other one, ArchiCAD? Same thing. At the end of the day, you're producing the same level of information. How you get there is different, and those are important things to understand. Standards usage. How many of you have good codified standards that everyone follows all the time without fail? Just one? David, I expected that of you as a minimum.
No, but that's just me.
Oh, that's just you, okay.
Yeah, nobody else in my organization follows.
Okay, so part of building an effective training program is to bake your standards in. How many of you have ever dealt in a situation where you are working and you're not really sure what the standard is and no one can tell you, or you get 4 or 5 different answers, yeah, there's a lot of you. How many of you have ever gone to an in-house training class and wondered, why are we learning metric when all we do is feet and inches? It's concepts, right? So let's talk about the standards. Okay, are your standards pre-populated? So how many of you, when you sit down at your computer and you fire up a new project, how many of them are pre-populated with the standards that you guys need all the time? Okay, kudos to your CAD managers. Right? Are different teams using different standards? If you have a Revit structural team and a Revit architecture team, are they on the same set of standards within your organization? Maybe, maybe not. How are you going to find out? Are you guys working on drawings that are not following the current standard? How hard is it to get a drawing that you go, well, I know this is not to the standards, and how hard is it to fix the drawing? How many of us end up in the situation, I don't care what it looks like, it's got to go out the door at 5, and you can fix it later, and 3 years later you come to the realization you've never fixed that file? Right? Are your standards followed 100% of the time? What do you do with incoming models that come from outside your organization because they already have their own set of standards that they may or may not be following religiously? What is your process? Do you go through a cleaning process? Do you have a specific set of, checklist 1, we get the incoming model from so-and-so contractor. That model needs to go through this set of processes. It needs to be relocated back to the same origin that we have because they built it on, they built it somewhere over here. How many of you have gotten Civil 3D information? You put your surface in so you can know where your building is, and it's over here, and your building's over here. Not using the same set of coordinates. How many of this is documented in your systems now? Oh, 1. Excellent. Yeah. Okay, what's the most important, getting back to standard, what's the most important thing about standards? Does anyone know? $1 million question. Use them, document them. How about standards are a living, breathing entity and must continue to adapt and change based on the workflow of the software that you're using? How many of you are still working off of specific rigid standards created 20 years ago for AutoCAD and realize that that does not work in Revit? Nobody? Good. So here's some other questions to ask. Did you receive complete information necessary to complete a project? Were you given the full briefing? Were you given the entire set of data for you to complete the project from start to finish? Were you given the title blocks? Were you given information on how to do the title blocks? Were you only doing red line edits for the first week or minor changes? Or did they throw you right onto a brand new project that you're really scratching your head saying, I'm not sure why I'm working on this, they just threw me to the wolves? We've all been there. Mentors, I saw a lot of hands for mentors. Do you guys still have mentors, or are you mentoring other people? If you're mentoring other people, good. Share the knowledge, share the wealth. This is part of what makes training effective, is you have to know where you are and you have to know what you need. Okay, other things. What would they have liked to have prior to starting the job? Would they have liked to have training, familiarization, concise instructions, cheat sheets, understand their performance expectations? How many of us during our trial period with a new company had a clear, defined expectation of what they expected of me within 90 days? Oh, 1. Excellent. Made it a lot easier for you to understand what you needed to do, right? Okay? Same thing. How many of you have cheat sheets at your desk where you have like notepads where you write stuff down and you think, I know I wrote that down somewhere, and you spend the next hour flipping through pages in a notebook? How many of you do that now? Yeah, we all do. Okay, next question is, do they actually understand the process in getting work done? We all can do models, right? We all can do sheet layouts, and we can all do revisioning. But specifically to your company, how do you do that? How do you start a project? How do you document it? Where do you keep your title blocks? All of that information is relevant, and it's part of what needs to be baked into training. If you can eliminate all of these things, then you can focus on just the core skills that you need to improve for yourself. If you can eliminate all the extra fluff by having concise standards, by having cheat sheets, things like that. So now you've done all the talking, you've figured out where you are. Now you need to make a list. And the list is, you gathered all your information. Now you make the list of all the points and you assign a priority to each point. What is the key thing that keeps coming up over and over again? Maybe that should be priority 1, so on and so forth. Right? Then you create a class outline for each class. I am a firm believer in creating a class outline because it's going to drive how you do your content and how you do your teaching. How many of you have ever looked at an Autodesk training manual? First thing you start off with is a table of contents, right? And what does it look like? It looks like an outline, right? There's a reason for that. Okay? And then you need to make sure that you need to break it down, and you need to specify whether it's beginner, advanced, intermediate, expert. Give a brief summary, like obviously there was a brief summary on what my lecture is going to be about today. Same thing. Every time you generate a class, you need to have a brief summary of what's the expectations of what's going to be taught in that class, what you can take away. And have an idea of how long each one's going to take. Now, there's a reason for doing all this. Okay, here's just an example of what I've done in the past. Projects 101. This is a 1 to 2 hour session where we talk about creating a Revit project. Everything that goes into creating the project, where the central model is stored, opening up the work set related files if you've created work sets as part of your modeling, saving the project, the proper way and the improper way to save your project and synchronize it to the central storage. Session 2, this is the big one, central file no-nos. How many of us have ever screwed up the central file, right? And then we had to go beg IT to restore it back, and so we didn't do it again, right? We all got the shame, don't do it again, but we all know that everyone's done it. Using data references and anything that the users need to know about workflow, file systems, EDMS. Does everyone know what EDMS stands for? It's an electronic document management system. How many of you currently have one in place? How well does it work? It's the wrong answer. IT's there to maintain it, but you're the ones that need to drive how it's being operated. Now, the reason why you have all this information is now you need to go talk to management. If you cannot get management to buy into the program, or you cannot get management to understand that there's additional needs within your company, it will never fly. And you do this by giving examples of your class outlines, giving reasonings for running the class. One of the important things about giving the reasons is to say we can increase our productivity 5% in the next month if we do this. Okay, what does 5% efficiency equal to senior management? Dollar signs, baby, right? Ask for a pilot run. If they're a little iffy, if they're still not buying into the concept, run a pilot. Say, tell you what, give me one opportunity to see what I can do with a group of users. Run a pilot test. That pilot test serves two purposes. It allows the management to see it, and it allows the program to be more effective because you'll have a group of people who will give you real feedback in the beginning. Ask for a dedicated training area. Not all of us can do this, but if you can, ask for it. Look for an empty office, look for an unused conference room. If you have spare machines, use some lower-end machines. So you're not taking away from what they're currently doing in their current workspace. But you need to have a dedicated space where you cordon off everyone else and say, this is where we're going to conduct training. Same thing if you are, if you have someone that within your organization that, let's say, is really awesome at doing wall details and you suck at them, but you're really awesome at ceilings. Talk to them. Get to know them. Be friends with them, at least work friends, and then see about how you can share that information between the two of you. Find an office somewhere or find a blank space where you both can sit down. They can show you their process for their wall details. You can show them your process for ceilings. What does that do? That helps you out. Now we have the big one, creating effective materials. This will make or break your program. Okay? The examples that you use must, and I capitalize must be relative to the work that you're doing. I liken this, I go back to Civil 3D. I had surveyors that absolutely could not get past the point of creating surfaces and doing some other things that the examples were in metric, and they kept saying, we don't use metric. And I said, it's not about the units, it's about the concept. Well, I don't care, I don't use metric. We don't use metric, we will never do this. And I said, well, you are going to be creating tin surfaces, right? Yeah, process is the same. That was a big one. So what did I do? I had to go back through and recreate all my material that was in metric and put it back into survey feet, US survey feet. Guess what happened the next time I ran surveyors through it? They were delighted. Okay? Metric versus empirical. Actual work examples work best if you guys actually have central models that you can make a copy of and spool off on a separate drive or a server. Use those for your examples for like creating sheets, anything like that, because you've always got the model, you can strip out the pieces you don't need, and then you can rebuild it knowing this is what it should look like, this is what I'm teaching to, and we'll see if they match. How many of you have Autodesk official training guides anywhere lying around? Some of you? Okay. Okay, these are great for ideas and concepts. A lot of the work material in it is not necessarily relative to what you do, but the concepts are there, the walkthroughs are there. Sometimes it's a matter of taking this content out of these manuals and saying, we're going to take this, but we're going to adapt it to how we do things. We don't start with, we don't start necessarily with A, B, C. We go A, C, then B. Okay, switch it around a bit. But these are great starting points if you have never seen these books. But again, starting points. Set up the materials with your standards. So provided you have the time and the effort to do it, use your standards. Why is this important? Using your standards reinforces what your company needs to be reinforcing, which is standards usage. If you're creating a tin surface, well, actually, how about walls? We'll talk about walls. If you guys are creating standard exterior walls made out of, 8-inch cinder block, there's a specific color you assign to those, a specific material, that how you guys do it within your organization. If you don't have that set up as a standard in your training material, what happens when they're working on this and then they go back to the real world and start doing their own work and go, that's not the right color, and they change it? Now you've created an inconsistency and a problem that you have to fix later. Same thing. Also, any custom items that you have, include them in your training. How many of you have custom families? Oh, I'd like to talk to you guys. How many of you have .NET programming add-ins that you've added into Revit? A couple of you? What's the importance of teaching those things or understanding what those things do for new people and people that currently work there? How many of you know that that add-in only works for you? Right? And I saw a couple of you use EDMS systems. It's the same thing. Set up a training folder, set up a dummy project, the whole works. Walk them through your process. If you start them by training your process, you'll start them off right. Everyone still with me so far? Okay, class rules. I have a set of class rules that I hand out for every training class that I ever do. Never really changes, but it's important to have these rules. Why? Because you're creating structure. Approximate break times, and I say, all right, log into the computers, no surfing, checking email, working on anything that the instructor has not told you to do, because that's a distraction. Reinforce the fact that class is for them. If they're not learning from it because they've chosen to do other things, that's a fault on their problem, or fault on them, not you. So this is just an example. Modify it as you need. If you're doing lunch and learns, same thing. Build an outline. We're going to cover this in the first 15 minutes, this in the next 15 minutes, things like that. If you're doing one-on-one training with someone else where you're swapping ideas, say, okay, I'm going to give you the first half hour, you give me the second half hour, and do it on lunch. Deliver the training, be enthusiastic and confident, right? I'm probably boring you up here with my monotone. That's part of it. Do not hand out the materials or binders and expect the users to go through them on their own. Okay, that's not how proper instruction works. You show them, and then you let them do it. And if they run into a problem, you re-show them. And if they still can't grasp the concept, then you go over physically to their station and walk them through. That's how I do it. Do not lecture, use interactive training. Again, a lot of watch what I'm doing up here. Great, now I want you guys to replicate that, and if you get lost, refer to figure 4. Use a projector and a screen. Always use projectors and screens, because you can convey a lot more in a large surface area than you can on little monitors. Have handouts ready. Every morning when I've started class in the past, I have handouts at every single desk that I expect everyone to be at. I have additional white space in every single one of those handouts for people to jot down notes, to ask questions, to say, I'm not really sure, but I think this is what we need to do. Be on time, start on time. This is my big one. Training's for them. And I've told people over and over again, I said, we will start at 8. And I mean 8, not 8-ish, not 8:10, 8. We have a lot of material to cover, and we can't afford to wait for everyone to show up. Okay? Latecomers need to understand that they will need to catch up, barring extenuating circumstances, right? If there's an extenuating circumstance, you can either hold the class up or you can put them in the next one. Okay? Signin sheets. You can track who has actually attended the training. Write up a summary of the class and give it to your manager and the managers of those that were in the training class. Why is this important? Okay? Write a summary of what you've learned. Write a summary of, for the individual, write a summary of what you've learned. So when you go back, now you have new concepts. How many of us would always like to continue to grow with the knowledge that we have? Well, if you can show that this is what you've been trained in, then they'll give you those opportunities to show it. Be prepared for feedback. So have a notebook handy to jot down notes. If somebody says, I just don't understand how to do this concept, and I just can't get it, jot down a note. Say, all right, we need to do a little extra work on this, or maybe I need to figure out a different way of showing that concept. So you capture this information and you apply this to your next class if you're teaching, or you apply it to the next time you're learning a concept. After training, I usually do this. I take the employee back, talk to their manager, say this is what we've done, this is what they're ready for, and then let them go. Feedback. This is the feedback loop. Feedback, and I've always done this via email because that way it's kind of nameless and faceless. But be prepared, need to have a feedback loop. Your training programs will not get better unless you have feedback. Be prepared to accept negative feedback. What do you do with negative feedback? You use it constructively to make it better for the next group. Okay? Change methods, time, or materials to address any issues that come up in the feedback. And here's an example of one of the questions. This is literally right out of one of mine that I've done in the past. And what I learned from this is we had to have handouts, and I needed to spend more time saying, make sure you watch me first, then do it. But these are important points. Follow up with management. Show management the results of your pilot. Get numbers from accounting for billable time. Okay, these things are long-term efforts. How many of you understand what an ROI is? Okay, that's essentially what you're doing here is you're creating a return on investment. An hour of your time learning a new concept makes you 5% more efficient. 5% is huge over the life of a model and the life of a project, right? How many of you know what your actual billable rate is for what you do? Okay? What if you can get 5% more work with 10% less stress and still produce the same amount of work, but you're 5% more efficient? Okay, that's huge. What? There's always one, right? Every class, there's always one. Okay, use a percentage of, and don't feel bad. If the percentage of the return or anything seems too high, how many of us have ever seen, that can't be right? Even though it is, management isn't gonna believe a high number, lower it. Make it, if it's way too high for your feeling, lower it until you feel it's comfortable. Okay, because again, you're gonna have large short-term gains, but long-term it's going to taper down. Use this to help drive the point of management on the value of keeping the program in-house and continuing to train employees. How many of you have regularly scheduled training? Only a few of you. How effective is it? How many of you enjoy going to it because you get to learn or enhance a concept you already understand? No one? What are they teaching you? Oh, you're the teacher, okay. So conclusion, you need to provide a framework for creating a training program. You need the starting point for all of you. And I mean that, this is the starting point. Think about what you know now. Think about concepts, ideas, pieces of the program that you don't know well, or don't know at all. And think about, what can I do to enhance those things? Take it to your CAD manager or your BIM manager and say, it would really be great if we could have a training class on A, B, and C for an hour. You'd love someone to come ask you that, wouldn't you, David? No comment? Okay, at the end of the day, we want a better trained workforce. Why? Promotability, right? Makes the company more profitable, right? And increases your skill set. Why you need to persist. How else will you cut down on new employees' questions? How can you cut down on your own questions if you keep getting stumped on the same thing over and over again? How many of you have that one guy that you know that you all hate that keeps asking you the same question every week? Oh, I saw one. They do still exist, right? So you need to embrace training as part of your culture. And training starts with you. Ask the questions. Ask, why can't I do this? Why can't we have focused training for specific items? Did I see a hand? No? I think I saw you eating. So resources. There's a lot of resources you can use. You can use your reseller. How many of you know who your reseller is for your organization? Okay. They have AOTG books. They actually used to be called AOTCs. Now they're AOTGs. They also have train the trainer classes. You can hire paid consultants. I've done that in the past. They're knowledge experts, and you can actually have the consultant drill down and only teach those specific concepts that are troubling you. You can use your own network of peers. Look around you. There's a whole group of people in here that would love nothing better than to share their wealth of knowledge, right? How many of you would love for someone in SeaRUG organization say, hey, do you know how to do this? Would you have time to show me? How many of you would like that? See, there you go. Other user groups and organizations you belong to, AIA. How many of you are members of AIA? How many of you know what that stands for? Okay? Your power users. How many of you have that one guy that I hate going and asking him a question because he knows what I'm going to ask before I open my mouth? There's at least one. Okay? The internet. Great place. Canned video training. Have any of you ever looked at Augie's training videos? Anyone? Anyone know what Augie stands for? How many of you remember Augie when you used to have to pay $25 a year? That was fun. What's that? I know, you can still be, you can pay more and get more, but you can join for free, it is free, and they do have some good videos as far as basics. How many of you have ever looked up YouTube videos on how to do something in Revit? Ah, see, a lot of you. Is that a great resource or just a ho-hum resource? It depends on the content. All right, any questions? By all means. Yes, David.
Because I can't
think gets it.
Okay?
And I'm kind of hoping, especially since we have a bit of time, that maybe we go meandering down a different path. But I'm wondering if there's any kind of like evidence-based studies done or data that anybody's looked into, maybe Autodesk has. Doubt it. What you're describing is a very traditional training scenario, and one of the things that we struggle with is as a general contractor, we're not a company full of standards and manuals and things like that. We're pretty dynamic, so capturing knowledge from our users is a big challenge. We just recently started an internal wiki site. We've got a YouTube channel where we can put like clips of the stuff you got trained on. Here's the 3-minute version on how to do that specific feature. And that's sort of self-paced. I'm wondering if there's any evidence that works better than sitting through a training in a classroom in a more traditional sense. The reason why I ask that is because, I don't know about you guys, but what I have found typically in places where I've had to set up training, the facility for it, the old computers, the licenses of Revit, those sort of things that are very difficult to come by. And setting up sort of a training room scenario, even in jobs where I've had a training room, was a very difficult thing to come by. So I'm looking for alternative ways of delivering training, if you could kind of take it.
Absolutely. I can actually answer that question. Okay, one of the things that we talk about is traditional and non-traditional. Non-traditional methods are some of the things that you've described. I've done both, okay? It comes down to how the learner learns. Not everyone is good at watching YouTube videos and understanding what they've just learned. A lot of people need hands-on. The best way you're going to do that is to do exactly what you're doing, is to create the mini sites, the wikis, the things like that, that are specific point related to a specific item. Now, you can use that you can certainly do that now, and you can use that as part of the greater whole later. If you ever end up in a point where you do have more employees, that you do need to have more formal, quote unquote, formal training, is you can say, this is what we're going to do, and you train them on how to use the resource instead. Okay? The resource that you're using, the wiki page, things like that, your little short YouTube videos, that becomes your training material. That becomes what you're teaching to. So it's the same model, you're just using it differently. Rather than have courseware and booklets, you're saying, go to the wiki. Here's how you use the wiki. And you go through and you train them on how to use the wiki to find their information, because I'm sure you have metadata, keywords, so if somebody's looking for a specific concept, they can type that in and they'll get hits. 3 videos and you've got 2 little write-ups on how to do something, right? It's the same concept. That's your training material instead of a formal classroom style. Both work. Both work well depending on the learner. That answer your question sufficiently? Okay. Yes?
What would you say is there anything about the nature or the structure of Revit that makes the way that you train it different from the way you train AutoCAD?
There's a lot of things different. Primarily the interface, primarily understanding the fact that you're working off of a central model and teaching the fact that you're working in objects, right? Revit is object-based. If it says it's a wall, window, or door, by God, it's a wall, window, or door. You're in AutoCAD, you have a set of lines representing a door and a set of lines representing. So it's a fundamental shift in understanding. It's the same thing with when I taught Civil 3D from Land Desktop. We'd draw a polyline that would represent an alignment. Well, in Civil 3D, you're creating the alignment as you go, and you can modify and pick that. In Land Desktop, you had to erase the alignment and start over if you had to modify it. But there is a difference, and it's understanding that difference and understanding what are the primary things that you need to understand. Way to go, Greg. What are the primary things you need to understand between Revit and AutoCAD and how they interact?
So just related to that, would you say that it's more concept? I mean, those are specific ideas that you just...
Concepts, yes.
More concept rather than specific skills?
I think Revit is initially, the training for Revit is more concept-based. I mean, you take AutoCAD training, for example, you're learning how to draw lines, arcs, and circles, and that represents things. In Revit, when you start off in Revit, you're learning the concept on how to create a wall. You're not actually learning how to create the wall itself, you're understanding the concept behind creating the wall. you remember going through the basic Revit training? And they talked about walls, and you drew a rectangle, and that became a building, and you're like, wow, that's really cool. Okay? It's the concept behind that you need to impart first. Once you get someone excited about understanding the concept, then they're going to start asking questions, well, what can we do with that wall? All right, well, you can go right here, and you can change that family, and you can change what wall type you have. Well, now, currently it's an interior wall. Standard 2x4 construction, 5/8 inch chipboard. Well, you click on that and you can change it. Well, now it's a 2x6 bearing wall. Things like that. It's concepts. You need to understand that you're teaching concepts. You're not teaching finite pieces unless that's part of what you need someone to understand. Then you teach the concept, and then you teach the specifics. So you may have two pieces where you teach the concept of how to set up a wall, and then you teach the specifics of how we in our organization do a wall. Well, and you've got to know what the wall is first, obviously. Any other questions? Really? Oh, there's one back up there. Yes? That's going to be a lot dependent. Okay, that's a very good question. What he was asking is if they have someone that says, all right, we're hiring a new guy, he's very good in architecture, but he's never used Revit before, how much time needs to be allocated to that? Okay? Normally, I would say you need to allocate at least a week to teach the concepts of Revit, the basic concepts, and get them past the point of thinking that it's lines, arcs, and circles. Show them what the tool can do. Get them excited. And then expand their knowledge slowly. Give them the things that they need to do their job immediately, and then plan for them to have additional features added to what their skill set is later. That way you'll get them up to speed faster because you're not throwing everything at them at once. How many of you you've all been through like the 4-day Revit basic training class and you walked away from that going, I don't remember what we did on day one? Right? We've all been there. I don't remember how to erase anything now. I can move it, but I can't erase it, right? It's the same concept. Teach them the concepts, teach them the basics, have an idea of what it is they're going to be doing in the initial steps, and then plan for it later. So really what you're looking at is you're looking at probably a 2 or 3 month investment to get them up to fully up to speed, but you start slowly, so you get them on just the basic concepts of Revit first, you give them a week or two to get that down, and then you teach them additional more advanced concepts as you go, and you plan for 2 to 3 months. Because again, if you throw it all at them at once, they're going to run away. Yes?
In creating office templates, you find a point of diminishing returns to have multiple different styles of templates, different building types, and templates become too burdened, if you will. As you have fast machine core memory, is there a point where a template can become too big that it clutters up the drawing as the model rests?
To answer that question, yes. You can actually create too many standards that will create a file that is too unwieldy to start in, to create a central model. My biggest suggestion is that if you have project-specific models, for example, if you know the project is for, let's say, a certain group that you normally do work with, set that one up for them. It's better to have multiple standard models to start with, or multiple project standards based on who your client is, than it is to try and incorporate it all into one giant one. And then again, that becomes a training point for standards. All right, if we're doing anything for group X, Y, and Z, we have to use this as our starting point. Why? Because it emulates all of the information that they want to see. But it's the same thing. How many of you have ever opened up a drawing template back in AutoCAD days and you found that it had like 400 layers and 300 line type styles? I see a couple of hands. How much fun was that to use? Not very, right? Same thing. It's easier and better to have multiple standards as a starting point based on the client you have. It's the same in Civil 3D. Okay, I'm going to go back there because I did this. We had an office in Las Vegas. They did a lot of work for Clark County, which is where Las Vegas resides. Clark County standards for what needed to be submitted were radically different than all the other counties in Nevada. We had 2 standard files that we started with for templates. Is it a Clark County based or is it non-Clark County for Nevada? We did that in Civil 3D, and it made a significant improvement on the quality of work, because if we knew we were doing it in Clark County, we started with this template. It had the styles set up exactly how Clark County wants it, so on and so forth for the other counties who didn't have a say like that. That's what I recommend, and that's what I suggest. I saw another hand up here. Where did I see the other hand? Oh, she must have been board and left, right? Yes.
So one of the things that we kind of put a little bit of emphasis on in this group is interoperability and collaboration between trades and downstream. And we've got a number of presentations devoted to that. One of the things that I kind of advocate in my group, and I'm curious to get your take maybe at in how to implement this at the, say, architecture or design firm level. We have a tendency to generate project-specific implementation plans and make training part of that, so we can do kind of a just-in-time training for the people that are about to go in the field to do something. Get them the tools that they need, at least the refresher, and for those of them that haven't used it before, get them that training right at the point where they're going to go use it. Is that something that you advocate, like at the design level? We're starting a project, this is the client, this is the template, these are the standards, how they are today. This is how the kickoff that includes a specific training.
Absolutely, I advocate that strongly. If you're going to start a group of people, or even 1 or 2 individuals, and say, all right, we're working on Project X. Project X is with this particular client, and this is the particular municipality you're reporting to and have to approve things through, or things like that. Absolutely, we're going to do a refresher training, and we're going to start with, here's the standards that are expected in this file, here's how the central model will be built, and this is what we expect to see at the end of the day. I highly advocate that, because that puts it back in the forefront of their mind, especially if they've been working on other things. And this ties into the question I had over here regarding multiple starting points. Absolutely. And if you have those multiple standard starting points based on your clients, based on who you work with, based on the municipalities, you can train specifically to that, and you can always do that refresher right before you start the project in that area. And that puts it in everyone's mind, and I highly advocate doing things like that. That's point training. All right, we're getting ready to launch into this project. Absolutely, let's train it. Let's do the refresher. Let's get everyone back up to speed. Oh yeah, that's right. Everything needs to be green over here. Any other questions? No? Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.